we are in a summer series going through two books in the Old Testament, the book of Ruth and the book of Esther. And this morning we are in chapter 3 of Ruth, but I recognize it's summer, people are traveling, may have some guests here, so I feel like anytime you're in a narrative series like this, we have to kind of do what we all know streaming shows do now, which is like, previously in the book of Ruth. If you missed the last couple episodes, or you know how it is when now that they make you watch shows week at a time, an entire week goes by, you're like, I don't even know what this show's about, but I know I have to watch it the day it comes out. Oh yeah, that's right. So this is where we've been in the book of Ruth. In Ruth 1, there was a young couple named Elimelech and Naomi. Young Jewish couple had two boys, and a famine came in the land of Judah, and they decided to head looking for food, and they end up in the land of Moab. And while they're living there in Moab, the father, the patriarch, dies, and the boys marry local Moabite women. And then years later, the boys die as well. And so now there's Naomi, the matriarch, living with her two daughter-in-laws who are both Moabite women. And in the midst of all of that grief, Naomi hears a rumor that God has revisited or brought food back to the land of Judah, to their hometown or her home country. And so she tells the girls, I'm going to go home, but you need to stay here. There's no reason for you to follow me back. I have no more sons for you to marry. All of your family, your culture is here. And one daughter, Orpah, says, okay, and she heads out. But Ruth, it says, decided to covenant herself, to cling to Naomi in this remarkable act of love and sacrifice. She says to Naomi, I won't leave you alone. As an older woman, as a widow, I'm going to stay with you. We'll get through this together. And so they head back to Judah. And then last week in Ruth Chapter 2, we saw that Ruth goes out to glean on the edges of the field, and Kelly did such a wonderful job explaining kind of the way that in God's law, he created a social net for those who were poor. And he would tell landowners, you're not allowed to basically reap your crop all the way to the edges. Don't try to maximize personal profit. Take everything you can from the land. Recognize that there are people in your community who are poor, the orphan, the widow, and they need food. And so what you would do is you would leave the very edges of the field available for the poor in the community to come and to be able to reap that or to glean that for themselves. It was a way of providing for those and showing God's compassion and mercy for people. And so Ruth goes out and does that, and she's gleaning on the edges of a field and realizes that the field that she's gleaning in belongs to a man named Boaz. And Boaz meets her and says, oh, I've heard about you. I've heard about this remarkable thing you did for your mother-in-law, how instead of just going home and looking out for your own self-interest, you actually covenanted to stay with this woman. And everyone's talking about that love that you showed. And he says, stay in my field. I'll make sure to protect you. Stay amongst those who are harvesting here. So that night, Ruth goes home and tells her mother-in-law, Naomi, you're not going to believe what happened. This man had heard about me, and he showed compassion to me, and he says he wants me to stay in his field. And Naomi goes, wait a minute, his name's Boaz? I think my husband was related to him. He actually has the potential to take you on as a wife, and that could be our way out of poverty. And so we're going to learn a little bit about the cultural dynamics of how that would happen today, but chapter 2 ends with this significant revelation that Boaz is related to Elimelech and therefore might potentially be able to show favor to Ruth and Naomi. The key term so far that we've talked about for 2 weeks is this Hebrew word Hesed, which translators have had a hard time putting into English. Some have called it loving kindness. Some have called it steadfast loyalty. Others, loving commitment. And we've said that these are kind of like clumsy English terms for something that is so profound. And part of why is because the reason Hesed is so hard to define is because it's not something you talk about, it's something you do. It's almost easier to point to it when you see it than it is to put it into words. And so Bible translators have had a hard time coming up with succinct ways of saying something so profound. And it's almost as if the book of Ruth is going, let's stop trying to define it. Let's just look at a story where it happens. You'll know it when you see it. Hesed love is the commitment to put someone else and their needs before me and my needs. It's part of the character of God. And yet, ironically, in chapter 1, we saw the word Hesed attributed to this foreign woman, Ruth, this Moabite, a tribe that were enemies of God. An enemy of God expressed the character of God. That's part of what was so remarkable in chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, we saw how Boaz began to reflect similar love back. And now in chapter 3, we're going to see how he's going to come full circle and kind of give his own full expression of Hesed love back to Ruth in the same way that she showed it to Naomi. So we're going to read the whole chapter as we've been doing in this series, and we'll just kind of pause along the way. Anytime you're reading an ancient text like this, you have to recognize there are so many cultural traditions that don't make sense to us at all. And it's easy to kind of read our own interpretation into it. We're not trying to do that. We're not trying to Americanize or contemporize this text. We want to understand what was actually happening there. So we'll kind of pause along the way and make sure we understand some of the ancient details. Ruth Chapter 3. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have been working, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note the place where he is lying, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Now, we don't have many threshing floors now, not very agrarian, especially West Coast out here. But a threshing floor was an elevated flat surface. It was elevated so that it had access to wind. And to thresh, you would literally take all of the crop that you had gathered, and you would begin to pitchfork it and throw it up in the air. And the light chaff that you didn't want would blow away with the wind, and then the heavy grain, the kernel that you actually wanted, would fall back down. And so you just spend the whole day pitching it in the air, letting it fall, until by the end of the day, all the chaff had blown away, and what you had was the valuable grain. And so at the end of the harvest season, this is where everyone has to gather. They take turns in the threshing floor area, throwing their barley up, letting it land. And then by the end of the day, basically you've got now your crop, your income for the year, but the day has gone by, and you don't have time to transport it, so it's going to sit in a pile. And so they would have kind of a big festival feast, and at the end of the night, you would lay down next to your own pile of grain as like a security guard. You basically would be as close to it as you could so nobody would come and steal it, knowing that the next day you're going to get it back to your home. And so that's what's happening here. Boaz is a wealthy landowner, and he's sleeping on the threshing floor at night right next to his crop, making sure no one comes to steal it. And so if you read Naomi's instructions as a modern reader, it does sound a little odd. It's like she's telling her daughter-in-law, wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, go down there and then uncover his feet. It feels a little seductive. Like every time I read this, I'm like, I got to make sure I understand exactly what's going on. It's almost like she's like kind of like, hey, slide into his DM, see what happens, see if he'll notice you. Well, what I think is really going on is it's not an act of seduction, really, and I'm sure putting on some perfume and bathing and putting on your best clothes didn't hurt in this attempt, but really what she's doing is signaling that as a widow, she's no longer in mourning. Right? When you're in mourning, sackcloth and ashes, you would not care for yourself externally. You basically would show the people, I'm so filled with grief, I can't even think about how I look to you. But now she's saying, it's time to change. You need to make yourself available now because someone needs to provide for you. And so clean up, end your time of mourning, and go present yourself at his feet. And that image of being at someone's feet, I mean, we think about that even now. If someone is standing up and someone bowed down before your feet to put themselves below you, we would see that as an act of submission, right? Like people did to Jesus, people do to kings. Well, the same thing happens when someone lies down, is that you would still put yourself at their feet as a way of showing that I'm submitting to you. And so what ultimately happens in this night is that she lays down there and then thinks, well, how do I wake him up to notice me? I want to have this conversation with him, but if I just start shaking him, he's on high alert. He might freak out, right? He might think it's a thief. He might throw a punch. He might make a scene. I'm trying to do this all stealth. And so the mother-in-law had a kind of cool idea, which is just basically uncover his feet and it'll get cold, right? It's like wake up middle of the night and all of a sudden all the blankets are off you and you're freezing. You're like, how did that happen? You put them back on and go to sleep. Just pull the blanket off his feet. In the middle of the night, he'll wake up and he'll look down, and when he goes to cover his feet, he'll notice you're there. And so that's what she does, and he gradually and gently wakes up and finds her laying at his feet and realizes that a woman laying herself at my feet, that's a powerful symbolic gesture. She's She's expressing humility, submission. This is a request for protection. And so let's see how it works out. The text continues, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Again, two more kind of cultural artifacts to unpack here. The first is that phrase, "spread the corner of your garment," which in Hebrew literally means spread your wing over me. That was the standard kind of formal idiom that was used in a marriage proposal. In the ancient Near East, we see this in Ezekiel 16:8, where God describes his covenant marriage to Israel by saying, "I spread the corner of my garment over you. I spread my wing over you, and you became mine." It's almost like you can just imagine kind of throwing your arm around someone and pulling them in tight. And so what she is saying is, would you take me in as your wife? Would you have compassion on me and cover me? But the reason that she can say that is because of the second piece, which is when she says, you are a guardian redeemer or a kinsman-redeemer. Callie mentioned this briefly last week, but in Jewish culture, again, the provision for a widow would be that if a man died and his wife became a widow, that the man's brother would come and take her in as a second wife, and merely as an act of provision so that she wasn't all alone. But the beauty of it was that the kids would still belong to the original father. They'd keep his name, and the brother might take on the yard work. Not yard work. What do you call this? The harvest, the grain, and do all the field work. But eventually, the boys would have the inheritance. So it would be as if I died and my brother took Kristen and my kids until they were of age, and eventually they could work the field. But someone would be providing for my widow. And so the relative who could do that was called the guardian or the kinsman-redeemer. It was a form of family adoption that provided for widows and orphans as an expression of mercy. Again, part of God creating a law to say, how do we care for each other as a collective society? Let's make sure no one is left alone. And so in this moment, Ruth and Naomi think Boaz is their only chance at a flourishing and healthy life. The stakes are super high. You're the only person who can take me in, is what she's saying. Would you please do it? That's why I'm here at your feet. And he replies, Boaz says, "The Lord bless you, my daughter. This kindness is greater than the one you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. And although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of your family, there is another who is more closely related than I." Ironically says that this is true, but actually there's another. There's a cousin inside of the lineage that I have to go to first. I have to check with him. It's his responsibility, and if he wants to take this opportunity to do it, he can. And so he's showing, again, his own integrity. And so he says, stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. So lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me your shawl that you are wearing and hold it out." And she did so, and he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her, and then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" And then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Boaz, again, the same way that we saw in chapter 1, Ruth expressing these remarkable acts of commitment that the whole city was remarking on, Boaz now is doing these remarkable things. He's protecting the reputation of a foreigner. He's honoring his relatives by checking with them first. He's complimenting this young woman for her own noble character. I mean, there's a lot of integrity, a lot of character being shown in this transaction. And you might think like, well, yeah, that's what God's people do. But remember where we are in the world and the history. This is in the time of the book of Judges, a time of warfare and moral decay and spiritual drifting. The whole book of Judges ends with the last sentence that said, in those days, Israel had no king and everyone did what they saw fit. Some translations say everyone did what was right in their own eyes, not in God's eyes. In the book of Judges, we have characters like Samson who are using women for pleasure, who are exerting their power in life through violence over others. I mean, this is the ruling kind of vibe of the day, and yet Boaz is contrasting all of those cultural norms by acting with integrity and with character. And he doesn't have to. He's a wealthy landowner. He's got all the power in this culture. He could treat this vulnerable Moabite woman as property, but instead he's treated her with dignity and respect and generosity. He even sends her home to her mother-in-law with what apparently is 60 to 70 pounds of barley, which I'm still trying to imagine this young woman throwing over her shoulder and carrying back to town. Remember early in the chapter 1, Naomi's self-narrative when she changed her name, right? She said, call me Mara, which means bitter. She said, I went away full, but I've come back empty. You notice that God is beginning to change her story. She sent Ruth away empty, but now Ruth comes back full with food. She's got an abundance of grain. It's as if God is signaling to these two women, your story is changing. It's going from grief to life, from emptiness to fullness, from despair to hope, from affliction to blessing. I'm writing a new story. And all because Boaz is showing the same Hesed love to Ruth that Ruth showed to Naomi. And both these characters modeling the Hesed love of God towards all of his people. In chapter 3, it's beautiful how Boaz becomes kind of this foreshadowing of Jesus. This happens often in the Old Testament. I remember years ago at a former church, we did a whole summer series called Discovering Christ in the Old Testament. We just looked at books of the Old Testament and of images and metaphors and characters who were pointing forward to Jesus, who were a form or a type of Jesus, a foreshadowing of Jesus. And here Boaz is kind of fulfilling this role of Jesus, preparing the Jewish people for the Messiah who will come. He's extending grace to outsiders. Colossians 1 will say that we were once alienated from God. We were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now God has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. What Boaz does to rescue Ruth is exactly what Jesus does to rescue us. He meets us as helpless outsiders, enemies of God, it says, because of our sinfulness. And he offers to adopt us, to cover us under his wing of care and protection. And Boaz is prefiguring this sort of care that'll be modeled by Jesus, often to women on the margins of society, women who have medical issues, women who have been caught in sin and have been shamed. And Boaz is going to express God's Hesed love to the marginalized, to the oppressed, to the poor, to the refugee, to those who are God's enemies, are still worthy of love. But maybe the most significant Christ imagery, especially in Ruth here, is how Boaz prefigures Jesus as this kind of Kinsman-Redeemer. The idea that you have to be redeemed by someone that you're related to. And Jesus takes on human flesh in the incarnation so that he can be related to us. He becomes one of us. He becomes part of humanity in order to redeem us. Just like Boaz had to have the financial means to redeem Ruth, Jesus lives this perfect life of righteousness so that he has the character, the righteousness, the sinlessness that he can offer to us through the cross so that we can be with him. And then there's that willingness. The third part of being a Kinsman-Redeemer was not just that you were related, that you had the financial means, but you had to be willing to do it. And Jesus willingly lays down his life on the cross. And it says that he sits at the right hand of God the Father. 1 John says that Jesus Christ, the righteous one, is our advocate. He's our lawyer. It's as if he's standing before God the judge and arguing on our behalf. Lawyering, advocating on our behalf. We're going to see next week in chapter 4 how Boaz will go to court and advocate on behalf of Ruth so that he can redeem her. Jesus is foreshadowed all throughout Ruth. And so it's fitting that Boaz and Ruth will eventually get married next week and eventually bear children, and they will become the great-grandparents of King David. King David will be another one of these prefigures of Jesus, and eventually Jesus, the Messiah himself, will come from the lineage of David. They are related to Jesus just in the way that they're modeling the character of Jesus. We invite the band up as we into our application. I think it's hard often as a teacher to, and maybe even just when you read the Bible stories sometimes, to find applications for these ancient stories, right? You have to remember that this is just a narrative story. This is not written like an Aesop's fable. There's not a pithy little moral truth in here that we're supposed to take on, like the tortoise and the hare and, any of those sort of one-liner takeaways. This is just God's redemptive history being captured so that we can see how God works and how God's people respond. But here's what I'll say that I take away from this story that I think has a value by way of example for us, which is that one of the most remarkable ways that God's people can stand out in a world of self-interest and greed and exploitation is to walk in integrity and generosity. And there are so many cultural elements of here, like Kinsman-Redeemers and threshing floors and the hem of garments that don't seem to resonate at all to us. But you know what does connect with me is living in a world of self-interest, greed, and exploitation. Because human nature never changes. No matter what culture you look at in the world, across time and eternity, all the way to today, there are still those who are rich and powerful and who are ruled by self-interest and greed and exploitation. And one of the ways that God calls his people to inherit and to embody a separate kingdom, another way of living, is to live with integrity and generosity instead. To see those on the margins, to care for the poor, to look after the needs of others. When so many people are doing what's right in their own eyes, God invites his people to do what's right in his eyes. To live like Ruth, to live like Boaz, to live like Jesus, to model Hesed love. Hesed love that says, I'll put your needs ahead of mine. But we don't just do that with grit and determination. I mean, the application of a story like this is not just try harder to go be that kind of a person. The beauty of the communion table that we turn towards this morning is that we actually believe that Jesus Christ, through the power of the Holy Spirit, wants to dwell in us. That he wants to fill us, that he wants to live his life through us. That the most important thing we can do is cling to him, to lay at his feet in submission. And to ultimately surrender our lives to him and say, Lord, live your life through me. That your Hesed love will flow through me into the world. And so the most important act we have is not grit and determination, but it's surrender to him. And so this morning we embrace the posture of surrender. We remember that Jesus Christ surrendered his life on the cross, that these elements represent the body and the blood. The body that was broken, the blood that was shed on our behalf. And we embrace that posture of surrender in our own hearts and say, Jesus, fill us once again with your Holy Spirit. Let us become the incarnation of your Hesed love in the world. The people may say, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't even know how to explain it, but there's something about that community. They do things differently. They're modeling something differently. I can't even put it into words, but I can see it with my eyes, and that's what matters. I invite you to the communion table this morning. You can come forward, take the elements, and then when you return to your seat, take that moment of reflection with the Lord, and when you're ready, partake of the bread and the cup on your own at your seat. The table is open to those who place faith in Jesus Christ and would like to invite him to fill us afresh today. Please come.